I knew down the line I would have done with or without the CGI assistance. I still thought the story, the world, and creating the world was the biggest challenge of all.
Our job for visual effects on Gladiator was to deliver the big idea. When the movie needed to breathe and be big, it was always a visual effects shot.
On one hand, we have very old-fashioned filmmaking sensibilities and values, right? But on top of that, you have the absolute cutting edge of contemporary computer, graphic, and imagery that's going to be applied to what you actually see is then, therefore, increased by 5.
I first took a look at the script and said, what are the big beats? And confirmed them with Ridley. And then we just got into like, okay, conceptually, I asked Ridley, what do you want the audience to think in a perfect world when they leave this movie about the movie and about the visual effects in the movie? And he said, I want them to feel like they've sort of seen a documentary of Rome. I want it to be highly real.
Where I enjoy myself most, I think, is creating worlds. Sometimes new worlds, i.e. science fiction, or recreating worlds which is historical. History, your challenge really is to, see how accurate you can be in that process. And so it's to do with research and, of course, choosing the right people. It's still down to the artistry of those who are recreating that and getting it looking real. And the way you can smell the city and you can feel that the costume is real and is correct and is lived in. I only need, when I'm in the German front, let's say, well, quite a few, 1,000 to 1,500 troops against 800 Germans, and then I'm able to, with CGI, again, the computer, to generate a battlefield which looks like there could be between 5 and 10,000, 12,000 troops there. In the CGI terms, you call it tiling, where I take that group here of, let's say, 1,000, and I can reclone them 6 times to make 6,000, and actually have them moving across the ground and through the fire and up the hill, and to meet the Germans, and it all looks totally real.
If you look at the color theme of the movie starts to be very blue. And I remember Ridley said to me once, he goes, it's like, I want this to be blue. The only yellow thing I want in Germany is the fire. And what we were trying to sell in the German battle is the overwhelming technological superiority of the Roman forces. And the story concept was that they'd have these scorpions, which were like crossbows the size of Volkswagens, and they had catapults. And the catapults would shoot, incendiary bombs, basically clay pots filled with oil that would, be like, a Roman version of a Molotov cocktail. We had built 1 or 2 catapults and 1 or 2 scorpions, and they were really big and unwieldy, and it was a very muddy situation. So not only did we have to repeat those, we had to repeat our armies as well, because dealing with crowds is really quite time-consumptive and somewhat unwieldy. So in the Roman battle, we made things suitably large and detailed and sold the idea of technological superiority. So whenever there would be arrows going, there would be like thousands of arrows. I know we had one big shot from Marcus Aurelius's point of view, and that was a very interesting shot because Gladiator had basically no motion control, because I knew that Terry Needham would kill me if I brought motion control on the set, because he likes to work fast and make things happen, and motion control tends to take a lot of time. So we approached that big wide shot in a very interesting fashion. We shot 3 locked off VistaVision tiles, 1 from the left side of the battlefield, 1 from the center of the battlefield, 1 from the right side of the battlefield. We blueprinted all our lenses, so we know what lens distortion was in any lens. And so mathematically, we took out the lens distortion, sewed together the 3 tiles, and then added tons of virtual information on top of it, like digitally replicating and reproducing the catapults and the scorpions, digital arrows, digital fireballs, shot locked off plates of Neil's Corbol's fire going in the background, made all these things work, had our army here, army here, army here, made them all seam together, march together, and then we pushed into this big pan tile and did a moving POV going through with everything going off in order. So to make, it's like you start on this side and it's like fire, 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 fire. And then right when you get to the end of the firing, the background goes explode, 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 while all these people are all still rushing forward. To get that to work in a motion control shot would be a nightmare, because you would have to, in time signature, make everything go at the right time. But because we approached it as a post-process, we could slide all the elements until they worked, reproduce elements that we needed to do, and then right at the right point, have the perfect pan to catch it. Whenever I ask him what a shot should be like, he would always be drawing, and he'd draw, he'd say the shot before it's like this, and this is the shot, and the shot after it's like this, and this is how it sort of fits together in this big theme that we're trying to sell. Here is a picture, one of Ridley's many drawings that he would do on the set and say, this is how I envision the shot to be. This is for the Road to Rome. And this, we saw this, we were looking out, actually, there's a harbor in here. So what he said, well, what if we take away the harbor and put in a valley? And in essence, that's exactly what we've done here. This is a valley from Malta. This is the walls of Malta from the actual city. And then back up in here is city that we built, the city of Rome. It just made my job more straightforward, because instead of trying to search for what we were supposed to be doing, we would spend our time doing what we're supposed to be doing and trying to make it as good as it could be. He would draw these things up and they'd say, do you want this? And I'd go, what, are you crazy? Yeah, of course I want it. And then I'd go back and I'd say, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And so the people on the line working on the computers would not only understand what we're doing, but why we're doing it.
A project like this is a real challenge, a challenge to realise the vision, Ridley's vision, DreamWorks' vision of the city of Rome, the atmosphere of Rome, the people of Rome, none of which exist anymore. The trick and the challenge is to create invisible effects. So what we've done is create a Rome that didn't exist by 3D, 2D combinations of both. Now that's the difficulty, it's creating a believable city without being an obvious set extension in 3D or a matte painting or whatever.
We had a way to pre-visualize the digital sets and the real sets through the camera at the time we were shooting them. And then in pre-pro, I worked with Emil because I said, well, he's going to want to move the camera. He's never going to just say block it. So actually, when we showed it to Ridley, he said, well, what happens if I move the camera? I said, well, move the camera. And he moved the camera, and the digital set and the real set moved together, and he goes, whoa, this is fantastic. So he actually lined up what he wanted, and then we looked at it, and he said, okay, that's it, and we took off and shot it. So Ridley would work with first unit of Joaquin and Connie entering in, and we extended those shots, and we took the main street, or what we referred to Main Street or Oxford Street at Malta, was basically this main corridor down, and there was only one story of old ruin that Arthur addressed, and then we added, a second story, and, top stuff with furrowing banners and rose petals flying in the air, and duplicated the crowd out. And then we took the stuff that first unit had shot with the widest lens in the box from the highest crane we had, and then we reduced that down. At the same time, Alex Witt was shooting second unit to get different things for the entrance end and crowd shots and people cheering. And at the same time, I was shooting different stuff. Like I took, we had built this eagle that was about 5 feet across, and it was for the set at the palace. So I shot the eagle, then I shot this moving through under a big arch that we had done with stunt guys up on top. We needed stunt guys because it was very precarious up there, and they were cheering. And then I went back and sized up the eagle with the same lens and same angle, and I took this 5-foot eagle and made it like, 35 feet and put it up behind the people cheering. And we just basically went, and I tried to use what Arthur had built as much as possible and re-photograph it, because again, I come from being a cameraman. I like to approach things in a 2D world first before I build them in 3D. In fact, the big shot of the people coming up with the foreground people waiting for them, that's a shot we shot in the actual Coliseum set where we reduced the people We built the arena that was like the square in the Vatican. We built that in CG with some matte painting, and then we went and shot hill towns in the south of France as the hills of Rome. Then we went and nipped neoclassical architecture from London and put them back in there with additional three-dimensional elements. I asked Terry Needham once in pre-pro, I asked him, I said, well, would there be a lot of dust, you know, there? And he just looked at me and he said, it's a Ridley Scott movie, John. It's like, you idiot, you know, of course there'll be tons of dust. And also it will always be backlit. So, I mean, we took a look at basically how the shadows were falling, but we always knew that we'd be designing it in, you know, backlight to backlight. And just because it's the type of thing that it's really beautiful, and we know that he likes it. As far as light and shadow, we would always just take a look at knowing that it would be a heavy backlight and always either shoot elements or recreate elements inside the computer, either through matte painting or through volume renders or whatever, to give us that whole shaft of light through a slight atmosphere back, painting big highlight and shadow, and it would again be all dictated by the hole cutter, which was the Valerium. You know, because the Valerium was a big story point that really wanted to get through to people. Like, this is a retractable roof. I mean, this is like a modern day big business sports, only it was done back in the 1st century and before. The Colosseum is 3 stories tall, okay? And we built 1/2 of 1 story. And so John Math, over that 1/2 of 1 story, he actually draped a hole cutter Valerium that would cast light on that 1/2 of 1 story as if it were 3 stories up. And then we basically took out everything above that story, recreated a 3D extension for the rest of the Colosseum, a 3-dimensional and CGI, 3D CGI Valerium, and then we lit to match the stripes that he had already put into the on-set population. And then, of course, because we shot individuals on individual cards actually we shot them on video because the resolution was strong enough by the time we reduced it to fit in. We shot them in hard key light and in soft light. So when they were in open shadows, they would look correct. And when they were in hard key light, they would be appropriately lit.
We built what we had to build. So we built probably just over 50% of the Colosseum. I was then able to shoot in that and then top that up with CGI and put people, and it just looks real. And of course, I built enough so I can do reverses, so I can do the full 360.
When we were talking about bringing the Gladiators out, I said, okay, Rid, if you were back in Rome, let's just, for instance, if you could go back in Rome with a full film crew, how would you cover that shot? If it really existed, if it weren't a visual effect? And he said, well, gee, if I did that, I think I'd do a huge Steadicam move around and just not cut away, right? When you think that you were going to cut away because it was a process shot, I just keep going, right? And I said, well, we can do that. It won't be cheap, but we can do it. And I looked at the guys from the mill and they went, yeah, I think we can do it. And they were tremendously game guys, and we all got on that bandwagon. And I think conceptually, if you do that and you sell that you're in the Colosseum, and right when the audience would think that you'd cut away, you didn't cut away. It's sort of like knocking out the bully in the schoolyard, you know? I mean, you've got them for the whole rest of the movie.
You see the whole vista, you see the whole sweep around the arena, and for us, that was an extraordinarily challenging shot. We have to track the shot so that we can then build and extend in 3D the stadium, add all the crowd and finish the whole of the stadium off. Plus we have all the people in front of the camera who we have to remove and paint back. That was a very, very difficult shot to achieve and took a very long time.
So I've got 5 stories going up in front of us. Once we cut round here, we can adjust. If they were that close coming out, we can adjust, come out like that, and come out like that, and come out like that.
Just give him a little space.
Because he's what needs to get between anyway. Is that all right?
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great if there was a little spacing on.
We will.
Okay,
We will. Once they get out here, the key is for them to, is to start to separate a little bit with a view to getting back in together out there. So if they naturally separate just by...
They do anyway.
Yeah.
Spread early.
Spread
early. Good.
Should we do it then?
Yeah, let's do it. 1, 2.
Clemens, can you keep up with his action to be able to do the 360 on
We're
that?
going to have to slow it down for my camera, but it'll hopefully be all right. Yeah.
All right. This is a rough pre-visualization for what we call the 360-degree Steadicam shot in the Carthage battle. This is the rough pre-visualization when Ridley said, well, let's do it as a Steadicam move. We showed him what it might look like. And the red is the set. Okay, so now he's off the set. This is all would be CG extension, straight up. As you come around here, again, the red part, as you come around, is the real set. So now we're coming back onto the real set just for a moment here, looking back up. So what we did here is this is a rough on it. First, we worked out the move in the computer. Then we knew, because we worked out the move in the computer, we knew we had a computer model of what was going to be built in Malta, so we knew how much would be on set and how much would be offset. Okay, so this is what we really shot when we were there. We had a real sunshade out to go over part of the crowd. Now we're completely off the set. Now we're coming back onto the set, but there's only a partial set there. So as you can see, the amount of stuff that's not there is fairly large. We're looking right into, for the most part, a Coliseum that doesn't exist, except in the mind of a director and the guts of a computer someplace. Then we went back in, we created our set extensions to the Coliseum to have the Coliseum go all the way up, including the Valerium, and then we put people into the Coliseum, and this is very close to the finished product.
I don't think anything became perhaps easier than we thought, unfortunately. I think everything was at least as difficult as we thought. Shots like the overhead flyover, which was commonly known as the blimp shot, was incredibly difficult, incredibly time-consuming.
We shot the original plate, shooting 1/2 of one floor of the Coliseum with no Valerium, with 1,000 extras, basically 600 outside, 400 inside. And I never have ever seen 1,000 people look less impressive. It looked like 10 people, right? And we ended up really replacing almost everything except the ground. But I'm always in favor, especially when you're shooting a big CG shot like that, of always shooting a real plate, because it really tells you what the key to fill relationships are and how the light is really working. And we added the people, added, tens of thousands of people streaming in, built up the buildings, put people on top of the buildings, people in the buildings, built the Coliseum, put people inside the arches of the Coliseum looking out, because that was a big thing when we talked about the Coliseum. What would the people inside be doing? Well, they'd be looking out down to the people down on the ground. So they were put in. Then we built the Valerium, built out the Valerium. Then we even put in people on top of the Valerium arming and winching, right? Then we put people inside that, built the rest of the Coliseum, put people inside the Coliseum, and recreated the fight.
The process of putting a shot together can and could go on forever and ever. I mean, you can finesse and finesse and finesse, and it should be pixel perfect. The supervisors, John Nelson, Rob Harvey, and Tim Burke from Mill Film, have a lot of say in how far we take a shot, but ultimately it's Ridley. We want to make the shot perfect for Ridley, and Ridley has the final say if we should stop or not. But as a producer, of course, every producer knows that there is a fine line between going on forever and, spending millions of pounds on a shot.
We had an $8 million budget on Gladiator for visual effects, and I think we came in at 8.3 or 8.4 or something like that, and all those were approved overages that the studio really wanted, and we were. I tell people how much money we spent on that movie, and they're shocked, because we added a tremendous amount to the picture. I think the three biggest shots in Gladiator certainly are the German battle fight, which Marcus's POV, pans left to right, and bringing them out into the Coliseum, and the blimp shot going over the top. And those are big shots that they look real. They don't look like CG. And I'm very proud of them, and I think it's one of the many ways where we sort of delivered our prime directive, which is to make the big idea sort of approachable and accessible to modern audiences, because it's like Rome is such a big idea. What somebody once told me, it's like the glory that was once Rome. It's big and massive, impressive, and those shots really worked into the puzzle to try to deliver the goods.
The feeling about the movie was always that the default position would be we'd have a really cool action movie. Enough teenage boys would pay for the movie to break even.
We thought it would be a big film, but we didn't really expect it to be a worldwide global phenomenon. I think the universality of appeal it had was surprising. Nobody really knew that it would be so popular.
In the first test screening, the audience was quiet all the way through. And there's no one who's not sweaty when you've worked that hard that long, and it's hard not to project your fears onto the silence. Every now and then you'd hear some reaction, you'd think, boy, they sure seem with it. And occasionally there'd be some moment. Laughter is a great way to tell when they're with it. Started noticing on little things, the tiniest jokes that Juba and Maximus might make. The end, thunderous applause, but really the most important thing from that first test screening, by far the most important thing, was women liked it as much as men. And that was when we knew we had a chance at the movie really having a great life.
I remember when we saw Ridley's first cut, you know, the movie was there. I mean, there was much work to be done, but the movie was there. And what was surprising was that you cried at the end of it. I mean, that for all of the spectacle and the action, it really was emotional and very intimate and really made good on its promise of being a story about a man who wanted really nothing more than to go home.
Well, the first reaction was fantastic. That was it. I think they knew they had a big one right there. And after that was just minutiae. What about this? What about that? So well, we tried that, we tried that. Do we really need Commodus hacking his father's head on a marble bust, which will now be back in the movie, because that was one of my favorite little bits on him.
I was really upset at first because all the intrigue scenes had been cut out.
There was a nice scene between Gracchus and Lucilla, kind of a conspiratorial scene. That was nice in terms of you know, seeing the kind of behind-the-scene politics. Obviously, it was taking away again from the main storyline, but it was a beautiful set, and you could see Lucilla's character, you know, and we took it out because we felt that maybe it's better to not know exactly where she stands.
And also a version of the prison scene that Russell and I had shot first was, I felt, infinitely better than the one that's there.
My son was innocent.
So is mine.
Some of those things I was really disappointed in not being there. And it's like, I think all actors have this personal relationship to a script. And you want that relationship that you have with the script to be on the screen. And if anything is missing, at least in my case, if anything is missing, I'm like, what? They stole it. They took it away from me.
The first time you see a movie, if you work on it, you go, oh, they've used that bit. Well, where's that? I was standing over there. That was the day that Russell was pissed off. Well, that was the day that Edie turned up late. That was the day the guy was rude. That was the day, you know, the first time you see a movie. And then really I enjoy it the second time, I think, because then I sort of let go of all my memories and things.
I saw I suppose it would have been a fine cut, pre-music, and I found it very good, but wasn't quite working, but everybody knew it wasn't quite working.
I had thought from the beginning, and I remember having this conversation with Bill Nicholson, if this movie were done right, it would be taken seriously. And I think Bill thought, well, you know, I've come on to do some work here, I'm not sure, or I think he was like patting me, sure, David.
Then I saw it in its final form. here in London, and I was completely astounded. And I, of course, for the first time I was seeing the music,